Good morning, Reed here, back at Orchestra Farm. Thanks for joining me today. So I was at a men's group last night, and this notion of like the group has a code, like some principles to, essentially live by or at least be together by. And it is frosty here. Let's get it. See all that nice, beautiful frost? Really is beautiful. I don't know if you get frost where you are, but I don't mind the frost. Anyway, and some of the fellows brought up this idea of they don't really like codes, and they brought in this idea of rules, and they don't really like rules. And so, if you're new to the channel, thanks for joining today. And a heads up, like me, I consider myself an anarchist. Now, I do not live in an anarchy. There's obviously rulers here in Canada, and and basically most of the world. But the nuance here is anarchy is not no rules; it's no rulers. And the notion that I don't need somebody else to tell me how to live my life. Mind you, let's chat about these differences between rules and codes and how they might relate to ourselves. Because I love a phrase by Geoff Lawton, epic permaculturalist, where he says that the constraints of a system bring elegance to the design. Now, I'm paraphrasing, so if you go look that up, it's going to be a little bit different because I'm more of a paraphraser than a quoter, but you get the gist. Wow, let's check out this ice. They call this hoarfrost. See how the soil's kind of rising up from itself? That's so cool. And this notion of being a parent. So, in being a parent, there are rules for the kids. And as the children age, there's less and less rules to the point of they're an adult and they're doing things of their own accord. Your rules no longer apply to them. And this is different than codes. And what I mean by that is, I grew up with this notion of be true to your word, that your word really matters. And that's a code, don't steal. It's not actually a rule, it's more of a code, respect other people's property. And if you break a code, there are serious consequences, generally speaking. Yes, some people get away from it every now and then, and we'll go to the next level up to this in a minute. But the idea of when you're relaying the codes of your life, they're kind of like codes of your culture. And so if your children maintain your culture, they're maintaining those codes moving forward. Whereas, the rules are somewhat arbitrary and they're used to direct towards the codes. And once you get it down, it's just I don't need the rule anymore because I'm following the code. And what does the code lead to? Well, the code leads to ideals. So I made mention last night, when I was a child / teenager, one of the things I aspired to was the notion of becoming a saint. Now, I don't feel like I'm anywhere close to that, which is just fine in actuality. But that notion of that's up on a pedestal, And I'm curious for you all, what are some ideals in your life, things that are up on a pedestal? And the notion that the codes that you live by are things that are pointing the way to those ideals. And that question of, you start with some rules, they move towards codes, and then that leads towards ideals. And, let's be honest, very few of us reach the ideal. At least that's how it would appear from where I stand. Maybe more of you out there are hitting them. And maybe they're not as elevated as sainthood, which frankly, great, because we could use some people reaching their ideals at this point in time. And, a lot of people who meet me in real life offer me a reflection of like, wow, you seem so free, and you are perfectly you, not constrained by the average social ways of being. And that's partly because I realized earlier in life that the rules that were being put out for me aren't serious, and that there are these codes to live by. Now, here's another word that we didn't mention last night, but I think is really important here, and those are laws. Now, there's obviously like the human laws, like drive the speed limit, but then there's nature's laws. Let's say the law of gravity. And again, I'm open to things shifting and changing. Like there's laws of thermodynamics, but honestly, I think there's more of them than we know about, and I'm not an expert on any of that stuff. But that notion of like gravity, if you cross gravity for one fraction of a second, there are serious consequences. Like if you're on a roof, as a for instance, and you suddenly decide gravity doesn't matter to you for some reason or other, you could die. Let's just be honest about it. Whereas the speed limit law, you can go faster than the speed limit, and you could theoretically even travel right next to a cop or past a cop. And if you're just going 1 or 2 miles over or kilometers over, they're unlikely to pull you over. So it's not really a law. It's our use of the words, because what's the word, like we just think so highly of ourselves as humans that we're not actually honest with things. So that speed limit is really a rule, with the notion of, yeah, you can actually break that rule and there doesn't have to be a consequence. Mind you, if you're going 20 or 30 miles over and you pass a cop, unless they're real busy with something that's more important, you're going to get pulled over and get a ticket, which obviously is a consequence. And then those laws, though, change depending on where in the world you are and how that functions. So that's why that's like, they're more semi-arbitrary or like place-specific. Whereas gravity, if you're on the earth, gravity is a real thing. And, the consequence of going against it is going to smack you in the face. So I think that's like an interesting point to put in there, to keep in mind of, these nuances between these different kinds of rule sets, and the notion of like, as an anarchist, there are absolutely rules, there are absolutely codes, there are absolutely laws, and some of them are human generated and make life better. Some of them are human generated and are kind of like, as long as you're not caught, it doesn't really matter. No one's hurt, nothing is harmed. And there are rules or laws that are nature bound, that are so legit that if you don't keep them in mind, your place will get flooded, your place will burn down, your place will be covered in an avalanche, your place will have a tsunami happen to it, your place will get struck by a tornado, and a myriad of other things that will happen if you do not take certain precautions and observe the laws of nature. And those are just completely for real. And so I'm curious out there, like, what are your rules to life? What are your codes to live by? Are there ideals that you're striving for? And, on the law front, is there a law of nature that you think isn't real, doesn't matter, can be overcome somehow? And don't try to give me the gravity thing and then tell me about spaceships going out into outer space, because, again, laws are place-specific also. And, they do apply out in space. It's just a different frame of structure out there. So, with that, thanks for watching today. Thanks for subscribing to the channel. And I hope that you all have too much fun.